Once again, I'm just going to quickly show these slides to show where this video series started out and where it is now and where it's going. On to the seventh and last of the supernatural explanations for the existence of suffering, and this is that the divine is not all good. Now, something of a tangent. I just want to note that many non-believers can read religious texts and say to believers, well, look, I don't know why you're having trouble reconciling belief in your God with the existence of suffering. The fictional God that exists in your fictional holy book makes innocent people suffer all the time. For example, Richard Dawkins wrote an article back in 2005 called The Theology of the Tsunami. And this, of course, was in reference to the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami that killed 250,000 people or so. And I'm going to read Dawkins' opening paragraph. I'm going to make a feeble attempt to imitate his upper crust British accent. I've never found the problem of evil very persuasive as an argument against deities. There seems to be no obvious reason to presume that your God will be good. Most of the Greek pantheon sported very human vices, and the jealous God of the Old Testament is surely one of the nastiest, most truly evil characters in all fiction. Tsunamis would be just up his street. The more misery and mayhem, the better. All right, I know that was bad. All right, I just watched a video also yesterday from another unbeliever who makes this same point, at least in the sense that there's no problem reconciling the existence of suffering with the belief in the God that had supposedly wrote the Bible. And this video summarized the character that the Bible calls God as something of an evil father figure, that he had these newborns named Adam and Eve, and he gives them a quick word of advice not to eat from a certain tree. But then after this brief warning, he lets his kids play unsupervised in this garden where, well, first of all, there's this great evil lurking, this fruit, this tree that bears fruit that will cause billions to suffer and sentence hopeless multitudes to face eternal burning in a lake of fire. But to make matters worse, God also creates this crafty talking serpent, who God must have known is going to encourage his newborns, his naive newborns, to disobey him. So God totally sets them up for failure. And of course they do fail. And God's reaction is to curse not only them, but all their unborn descendants as well. Several thousand years later, a character called God decides to provide an escape route from this curse. But how does he do this? He has his son tortured and then offered as a bloody human sacrifice to himself, and then says that this sacrifice will appease his wrath, as long as you believe that this sacrifice really happened. But, of course, people end up being the religion of whatever they were raised with. Hindu families tend to raise Hindus. Muslims tend to raise Muslims. So despite the bloody sacrifice of his son, God's going to end up sending most people to an eternity burning in a lake of fire anyway. Now, I paraphrased this video quite a bit. If you want to see the original, it's called Bible Wisdom 5, Stoning Children, Bear Attacks. And it's from the YouTuber Turpus Hereticum, which is Latin for foul heretic, and I'll put a link in the video's description box. Now, of course, Christians interpret this very differently, but I won't go into that because that would just heap tangent upon tangent. And my main point for this particular tangent is that non-believers see no problem in reconciling evil and suffering with what they see as the fictional characters in the fiction books that some people have considered holy, be it the Greek myths or the Bhagavad Gita or the Quran or the Bible. But I'll get back on topic now, because I'm still discussing the supernatural explanations for suffering. The answers that we hear from theists, the answers from those who truly believe there is some sort of supernatural power out there. Now, the explanation that the divine is not all good is something we usually don't hear from believers in monotheistic religions. We usually don't hear it from Judaism and Christianity and Islam, because each of these religions have plenty of passages that insist their God is all good. I recently watched, however, excerpts from the movie God on Trial. And I do want to discuss one interesting conversation that takes place in a Nazi concentration camp. And it's between the Jewish prisoners who can't at all let go of this idea that there is a God. And they can't let go of the belief that the Hebrew Bible is God's word. And with both of these premises being firmly held, one of them, a rabbi, points out that there really is no trouble reconciling what's happening to them in the Nazi concentration camp with their belief in the God of the Hebrew Bible. The rabbi says, well, look at how God took us out of Egypt. The Pharaoh is the guilty party. He's the one oppressing the Hebrews. But God takes his wrath out on every Egyptian with the plagues of flies and mosquitoes and boils, turning water into blood. And then God kills the firstborn of everyone in Egypt, from the Pharaoh down to the non-Hebrew slaves. God doesn't slay the Pharaoh, but slays the Pharaoh's children and everyone else's children too. When the Hebrews escape and God parts the sea, God doesn't close the water so the Egyptians can't follow. God waits for them to get far enough in, and then he closes the water so he can drown them all. In the Promised Land, God tells the Israelites to smite and utterly destroy all the current occupants. Show them no mercy. That includes the nursing mother down to the infant. And when Israelites do show any mercy, the acts of mercy anger God. He wants all life forms destroyed. When King David has an illicit relationship with Bathsheba and gets her pregnant, how does God punish them? By slowly killing their child, making the baby suffer in pain for 7 days before he finally dies. And the rabbi asks, did that child find that God is just? Did the former tribes of the Promised Land find that God is just? Did the mothers of Egypt find that God is just? This God, after all, supposedly made all these people too, but what did he make them for? Just to punish them through starvation and slaughter? What was it like for those people when God turned against them? And the rabbi's conclusion as he looks around at his fellow prisoners in the concentration camp is, well, they must have felt just like we're feeling now. Rabbi then talks about a selection that the Nazis made the other day, where the prisoners are forced to lay on the ground and the Nazis choose. Some prisoners allowed to live, others to die. And then he compares that to a section in the Bible, 2 Samuel chapter 8, verse 2. And it's after David defeats the Moabites, and he makes the Moabites lie on the ground, and he goes through the same kind of selection process. David kills 2 Moabites for every 1 Moabite that's permitted to live and become a slave. And the rabbi says, well, we have become the Moabites. We're learning what it was like to be one of the tribes that had been the occupants of the Promised Land. They faced extinction for God's greater purpose, and now so do we. And what did those tribes learn? They learned that God is not good, strong, but not good. The rabbi adds that God was never good, but back then in biblical times, God was on our side. The rabbi then notes that on the belts of the Nazis, it says, Gott mit uns, which means God is with us, and who's to say he is not? Rabbi adds that we see all the same things here in the concentration camp that we see in the Bible. God is still God, but he's no longer our God. And that's what's happened to the covenant. God has made a new covenant with someone else. And the rabbi concludes, is there any other explanation? Now, I'm giving a rather flat reading of it. The real scene is much more passion and internal anguish. And I'll put a link to that particular scene in the description box. Now, just another one of my many tangents here. When the rabbi asks, is there any other explanation? To myself, I'm thinking, yes, there's lots of other explanations. But to go into those explanations, you would have to let go of the premise that there even is such thing as a creator. And even if you can't let go of that particular premise, there are still lots of other explanations, as long as you can let go of the premise that this alleged creator is also an author, and in particular, the author of the Hebrew Bible. But I won't go into any of those alternative explanations, because I want to turn my focus now back to the supernatural defense of the existence of suffering. This explanation number 7, that suffering exists because the divine is not all good. And like I said before, this is an atypical explanation from believers in monotheistic religions. But it is very typical when it comes to the theology of followers from dualistic and polytheistic religions, which I'll get to in my next video.
Bad to the bone. Bad to the bone. Bad. Bad. Bad to the bone. I broke 1,000 hearts before I met you. I break 1,000 more, baby.